This is Margaret with Nixie, and this is video 3 about manufacturing in China. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about development. Last video we talked about whether it makes sense to bring your item to China or another overseas country to manufacture it. And so let's say you have an item and you've decided, yes, my quantity and my budget warrants going overseas. And you have Nixie, who is going to help develop and produce it for you. So the first thing that needs to happen is the product needs to be developed. You may have a prototype already, which would be amazing. If you do not, then, and even if you do, a drawing always needs to be made with all the specs. It's going to have sizing, materials involved, if you have a motor, all the ins and outs of the item. If you have that drawing, then you would give it to us, and we would take it overseas and find a factory that is suitable for your item. If there is no drawing and no prototype, we would first start with a sketch, or maybe you have a sample, what we would call a random sample, something that it's not totally specific to what you want, but it's what you want is something like this random sample. We would take that, we would create a drawing based on that, and based on any revisions that you've shared with us, we would create this drawing, 3D rendering with all the sizes, like I said, materials involved. We would pass that to you, you would review it, and if everything looked good to you, and maybe we would have discussions, because maybe you would need help, I'm not sure about this or that, we would talk through it. If we needed to tweak the drawing, we would do that until you were comfortable with it. Once that's done and you approve the drawing, then we would take it to the factory, and if the item involves a mold, then we would make a 3D printed sample, which would be made of resin. It's something that you could feel, touch and feel, and see the shape and the size. It would also be functional if there was something mechanical involved, or some kind of trigger or anything like that. Even made of resin, we would be able to make it functional. But it wouldn't be perfect, but it would give you an idea. If the item is a cut and sew item, or a paper item, paper box, let's say, we would then move into, after the drawing's approved, move into a structure sample, where it may be similar colors to what you want, similar materials, but maybe not exact, but it would be a structure sample, so you could, again, touch and feel, see if you think it's the right size, if the materials are working for you. And once that first round of samples, either the 3D printed sample or the structure sample, once those are done, excuse me, then we would send them to you, and you would review, and we would have a discussion and figure out what you wanted to revise, tweak. From there, we may go to another second round of the 3D printed samples, and a second round of cut and sew or a paper box to get it closer to what you want. After the second round of samples, if there's nothing mechanical involved, we should be pretty close to what you want and what you're expecting. And at this point, we will have a pretty darn good idea of the cost of the item. Once we've done a couple rounds, we know the materials, we know the size, we can get a great cost for you. Once you see the cost and everything looks good, and you want to place an order, at that point, for the item that requires a mold, we would go into actually making the copper mold that will be used in mass production. For a cut and sew item or a paper box item, we would then prepare, we would purchase the materials that you want, and prepare what we call a pre-production sample, and short of that we use the term pre-pro. So we would make a pre-pro sample for you and send it to you for review. For cut and sew or a box item, if we need to order materials, it may take 2 to 3 weeks. For a mold, it would take 30 to 40 days to make the mold, and then the factory does a few rounds of samples, polishing the mold many times and making sure it's perfect before spitting out a sample that we would then send to you. So that could take anywhere from 30 to 50 days to create the mold and get some samples from the mold, some pre-pro samples, which would be logoed. The cut and sew and or box would also be logoed at that point. You receive the pre-pro sample, you review it. Now this is very important. You have to look at it, look at the logo, artwork, anything that's on it, the materials, the size, how it feels, if it's a purse, cosmetic bag. Show your entire team. Once that's approved, we move into mass production. And we would, or any company that you're working with, would require a signed sample. So you would sign a pre-pro sample and send it back to us. We would send that to the factory, to our office in China, who would use it at the factory during mass production. And that is what we call our benchmark sample, which is used when we're doing quality control. We need to make sure it matches that sample that you signed. And then we would go into production, which I'll talk about in another video. So thank you for listening. I hope I answered any questions or satisfied any development inquiries that you may have had. If you have any questions, shoot them over. I'd be happy to answer them. All right, stay tuned. I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.